Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to New York and speak with economist and Professor Dr. Michael Hudson. Dr. Hudson, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thank you very much, Max.
All right. Dr. Michael Hudson, you were in Italy where you were treated like a rock star. Why were you there? What happened?
Well, the Italian journalist Paolo Barnard invited four of my colleagues and myself from the University of Missouri at Kansas City to explain the principles of modern monetary theory, which is what our university is known for. We're sort of the antithesis to the University of Chicago. And our job was to explain to the Europeans in general, and the Italians in particular, that the austerity is not necessary. There is no need at all for the government to balance budgets. In fact, governments are supposed to run a budget deficit. That's how they provide the private sector, the production and consumption economy, with the money and the credit that it needs and the income that it needs to grow. Basic Keynesian policy. We also pointed out that when a central bank creates credit and runs a deficit, it's not hyperinflationary. What is inflationary is the commercial banking systems flooding the economy with credit for the last 30 years to bid up real estate prices, stock and bond prices, and to provide the credit for corporate raids, takeovers, and what has basically been loading down the economy with debt and has led to debt deflation today.
All right, so it's a variation on Keynesianism, or an updated version of Keynesianism. So how is it different, Dr. Hudson, than what already exists?
Well, Keynes was hoping that new credit would do what a government deficit would do, that new credit would be used to fund new investment and would put investment and labor in motion. But today's new credit doesn't do that. Credit is extended today to take over companies and to buy property and real estate that's already in place. But almost all the new capital investment in the American economy is funded by the retained earnings of corporations, not credit. So the financial sector has been decoupled from the production sector. And what we want to do at Missouri is reunite these sectors and modernize and industrialize credit for what people expected the banking system to be a century ago when the Industrial Revolution was still gaining power.
All right, so you're saying that Kansas City, University of Kansas City, where you and your gang hang out, is the antithesis of what's happening at the Chicago School of Economics. We know that there's a heavily influential component from the Chicago School that informs people like Christine Lagarde, who's now running the IMF, that informs the Obama administration. It's most identified, right, with Milton Friedman and neoliberalism. So is this the dynamic between these two?
The free marketers believe that you can't have a free market unless you ban and ignore and censor all discussion of any alternatives. So there's no interaction at all by the Chicago School of Antitheses. We're the University of Missouri at Kansas City, UMKC. And there's a blog. If you were to Google UMKC economics blog, you'd get the blog New Economic Perspectives, that's edited by Stephanie Kelton, who's the incoming department chairman of the economics department. And you'll see we have a regular commentary on what's happening in the economy and an alternative to the austerity and the pro-financial lobbying that the Chicago School does. We have so along with me in Italy, we're Stephanie Kelton, Bill Black, who's talking about law, and another blogger, Marshall Auerbach. So the four of us were basically there explaining for 3 solid days all about monetary theory. And it's amazing. There were over 2,100 people in the stadium. It was a sports stadium. And when we walked in on a Friday night 2 weeks ago, we couldn't believe it. We walked down the aisle and walked and walked and walked, and none of us had ever had such a gigantic audience, and they were all there early. They stayed to the end. They really wanted to hear modern monetary theory and how central banks were supposed to run deficits, not surpluses, in order to reflate the economy.
All right, University of Missouri at Kansas City, with modern monetary theory, received like rock stars in Italy. Of course, you're saying that the other side, the Chicago School, doesn't allow for any kind of debate going on. But it does have one apostle with a big platform in Paul Krugman at the New York Times, correct?
He's more of a neoclassical. He's sort of liberal, but he doesn't focus on the debt issue or debt deflation that we do. And he believes that the government should balance the budget pretty much. He doesn't follow modern monetary theory to anywhere near. He tries to be sort of the voice in the middle, and he doesn't really discuss our theory or discuss us by names. We're the unspeakable ones. We're the people that liberals like Krugman won't talk about. We're the people that the University of Chicago, in the magazines that it's put its editors in, will not permit discussion. So basically, the free marketers are censors. They don't believe in a free market of ideas. They believe in what they did in Chile. Remember, the first thing the Chicago boys did in Chile was close down every economics department in the country, except the one they controlled. One of their professors, Paul Harberger, was accused of sitting in his hotel room fingering what economists should be excluded, and he said he had no idea that they were going to have their stomachs cut open in helicopters and thrown out over the oceans. He had no idea their families would all be killed. He had no idea that the people he was citing were going to be victims of the Operation Condor that killed thousands of labor leaders and economists. He had no idea that when he and the other people were closing down all the departments, that they were to be herded into stadiums and machine gunned and killed and tortured. But that's the effect of the Chicago school. And certainly he had no intention of ever acknowledging that there was any idea except for his own censorial people. That's why when he tried to take over Harvard's Harvard Institute of International Economics, the students all protested and said, "We will not have men with blood on their hands coming here and degrading our university with their intellectual intolerance."
All right, Dr. Hudson, now, the other side, the right side, let's call it, the Chicago school, they claim to have the free markets on their side. We know that their school is dominant in the current economy, and the current economy is generating the biggest wealth and income gaps in the history of the United States and is clearly failing in many countries around the world. So where does this term free market get lost? Because it's not a free market.
The Chicago school have inverted what the classical economists meant by free market. When Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill in the 19th century in the progressive era spoke about free market, they wanted the free markets from the rentiers. They wanted to get markets free of landlords, free of the bankers, and free of the monopolies. The idea of free market to classical economics was to bring prices in line with the actual technologically necessary costs of production, so that it wouldn't include land rent. Land rent would be the tax base. It wouldn't include interest charges. It wouldn't include predatory banking charges. And monopolies were either to be regulated to keep their prices in line with the actual costs, like America regulates the bills that electric utilities can charge, or most monopolies would be, as in Europe, kept in the public domain and operated as public utilities. And if there was something basic like education or roads, these would be provided freely in order to minimize the economy's cost of production and make it more competitive. This was the whole philosophy of the Industrial Revolution, and it was the free market idea that the classical economists had. But the rentiers fought back. Around World War I, they began to invert it, and their idea of a free market was free for predators, free for monopolists, free for landlords to gouge whatever rents they could get, and to free themselves from taxation so that the government had to tax labor and tax industry. And the result is that the American economy today, under the so-called free market, has such a high cost of living and a high cost of production that labor can't compete internationally. That's why America's balance of trade has moved so far into deficit. If an American worker has to pay 40% of his income on housing, if he has to pay 15% for health care and Social Security, FICA wage withholding, if he has to pay another 15% in excise taxes and sales taxes and income taxes and other taxes, and if he has to pay other debts for credit card debt, education debt, then obviously even before he spends about 1/3 of his salary on goods and services, his monthly nut is so high that he's priced out of the market. And that's why Americans can't compete in exports except for agriculture, which is heavily subsidized by the government, and of course the military-industrial complex exports that are done diplomatically through international negotiation. So free market is what is killing the American economy, and it's not free at all. It's free for predators, not free for labor, not free for industry, not the kind of free market that Adam Smith talked about.
Well, what you're describing here is, in a lot of ways, you could say that the Occupy Wall Street movement is simply a replay of what the original American colonies were feeling before they wrote the Declaration of Independence. They wanted to be free from the rent-seeking, occupying force of the British. Now the Occupy Wall Street is saying we want to be free from the rent-seeking occupation of Wall Street bankers. So therefore, my question is, would the Occupy people do themselves a service by maybe taking some classes at University of Missouri at Kansas City and brushing up on what you're talking about there to give them some intellectual firepower?
Well, the Occupy Wall Street people do have on Sunday here in New York a regular meeting of the Financial Advisory Committee. Kathy O'Neill runs it, and there are people like Steve Smith from Naked Capitalism is there. I'm usually there. Dave Kelly, who's Dennis Kucinich's economic advisors there. A lot of Wall Street insiders are there who say, look, we're money managers, we're hedge fund managers, but this is a hell of a way to make money, but we'd rather make money in a way that helps the economy, be productive, not in a predatory way. So you can be sure that there are some pretty smart people advising the Occupy Wall Street movement for what's going to happen this summer when school lets out.
Fantastic. All right, well, we're out of time, but thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report, Dr. Michael Hudson.
Thank you very much, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Michael Hudson. If you'd like to send me an email, please do so at keiser-report@rttv.ru. Until next